Good evening and welcome to the Ford Hall Forum. My name is Donald Ty, and I'm an attorney in Boston as well as a treasurer of the Ford Hall Forum. Before I introduce our honored guest this evening, I'd like to tell you a little bit about the Ford Hall Forum. For 87 years, the Forum has been bringing speakers of national and international renown to Boston and presenting them to the general public free of charge. We seek to educate the public by illuminating the most important issues of the day. Our speakers oftentimes learn something themselves, believe it or not, through our question and answer session, a staple of all of our forum programs. Bringing these programs to you is not, however, without cost to us. Meeting our financial needs is a constant challenge which can only be met with your support. In an age when citizens get most of their information in small sound bites on television or from short stories in the newspaper, the Forum has become ever more important. We offer you a chance to not only hear people who are shaping our world, but to interact one-on-one with them. Because our resources are so limited, we rely tremendously on the generosity of our audience. After tonight's program, we encourage you to stop by the information table on the right, on your left, to find out about the wonderful array of programs we offer and to join the Forum with the largest contribution that you can afford. Please note that the Ford Hall Forum's annual Evening at the Pops will take place on Thursday, June 29, 1995. The Forum is working in conjunction with the Boston Pops to bring you a truly entertaining evening as we have in the past. If you're interested in purchasing tickets for this special event, please visit also our membership table as you leave tonight. The deadline for ticket sales is May 23rd. Now on to our tonight's program. This evening we're joined by one of our nation's leading advocates for handgun control, Sarah Brady. We all vividly remember when her husband Jim Brady took a bullet meant for former President Ronald Reagan and was paralyzed. In the years following that incident, Ms. Brady mobilized the nation in her attempt to pass the Brady Bill, a bill requiring a national waiting period and background check on all handguns purchased through licensed dealers. The bill was signed into law by President Clinton in November of 1993, although its future under the new Congress is anything but certain. And in fact, today, Sarah Brady and Jim Brady were in Boston at the State House endorsing the assault weapons ban, the state assault weapons ban that's now before the legislature here. Ms. Brady became chair of Handgun Control, Inc. in 1989. She also serves as chair of the Center to Prevent Handgun Violence, Handgun Control's sister organization working to reduce gun violence through education, research, and legal advocacy. Prior to her involvement with gun control, Ms. Brady served as a delegate to 5 Virginia Republican state conventions and an honorary regent of the National Federation of Republican Women. She was named Washingtonian of the Year in 1983 by Washingtonian Magazine, USO Woman of the Year in 1984, and one of Ms. Magazine's Women of the Year in 1988. Also, Sarah Brady informed me that she endorsed with her husband, President Clinton, in 1984 when he ran for election. In order to get a perspective in time, Sarah Brady told me earlier this evening that she had a child at 2 years old when her husband was shot. That child is now 16. It's 14 years ago that Jim Brady was shot. It's really hard to think that it was that long ago. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Ms. Sarah Brady. Thank you.
Thank you. It is indeed an honor to be at this very prestigious forum, of which I have known about for many, many years. And it's like being home, being in this wonderful church. I went to college in Williamsburg, and Bruton Parish Church is about the same age, I think. And Jim and I were married in Christ Church in Alexandria, which was George Washington's church. But we always keep the doors closed. And I had to quit going for a while because my 2-year-old used to climb over each one door and bang doors the whole time during the service, and we had to cut it out for a while. So it feels at home to be up here with you all. You know, the mention, I do want to tell you, everybody always asks first, how's Jim? Jim is doing terrifically. He's been up here working since Tuesday in Massachusetts, well, first in Providence and then Connecticut and now Massachusetts, both for the head injury and for handgun control. He's out there working every day, and he hasn't lost his sense of humor, and he's doing beautifully. He's back in Salem tonight, and I'm going to go back and meet him for dinner a little bit later. People think I probably got involved in this issue because of Jim, and partly I did, but the real reason I got involved was several years later. And it's something that happened when our little boy Scott was about 5 or 6. And we were out visiting family in the heartland, Illinois, my husband's hometown of Centralia, Illinois, a little town. And some friends came by to take us swimming out at their swimming pool. And we went to go, and they had a pickup truck, and we were all going to squish in the front seat. And Scott jumped into the front seat ahead of me and picked up off the seat what he thought was a toy gun, and I thought was a toy gun. And he was kind of playing with it and being irresponsible, and I said, Scott, don't ever point even a toy gun at anyone. And I took it from him, and as I did, I realized it was not a toy, but a fully loaded little .22, very much like the one that had shot Jim. Well, as any mother, or really any of you would realize, my blood boiled. I was irate. I was furious that anybody would be so irresponsible as to leave a loaded weapon somewhere where a child could get a hold of it. I couldn't wait to leave town and get back to civilized Washington. What a joke, but that was my feeling at the time. And as soon as I did, I called up this organization, Handgun Control, and I said, is there anything I can do to help? And they said, yeah, come on over. And I've been with them ever since. Before I kind of talk about the current political situation, I'd like to give you a little bit of an idea of what our organization is and what we stand for. Because there are a lot of misconceptions out there about what we do believe. Because we have to recognize in this nation, and it's probably never been more apparent than this past week, that we are a nation of people with lots of different views, and there's certainly many people who believe in banning all weapons, and then there are many people who believe that everybody ought to be armed, but somewhere in the middle are what I believe to be a majority, 80 to 90% of the country, who believe all weapons do not need to be banned, but they do need to be heavily regulated, and that some weapons don't have any place on our city streets. And that is the position of handgun control and my position. We are not for banning all handguns or hunting weapons or anything of that type, but we have been for banning military-style assault weapons. Our very first piece of legislation on a national level that we got involved with, and it took 7 years, was the Brady Bill. And everybody here I know has heard of it. It merely called for a waiting period in which enough time was allotted to run a background check. And we thought there were two purposes behind that. The time was needed in almost every state in this nation because background checks today cannot be run instantaneously. Secondly, we think there's a benefit to a cooling off period. It helps very much in crimes of passion, suicides. It gives people time to cool down if they can't run out and get a gun immediately. Well, you would have thought this was a real easy bill to get through. That's what I thought naively 7 years ago. We had the support of all the top 12 major law enforcement organizations, from the chiefs down to the cops on the beat, the sheriffs, the troopers, the League of Women Voters, the PTA, the AMA, the ABA, the churches nationwide, practically every group you can think of that stands for what's decent in this country. And yet it still took 7 years. But proudly, we did pass it 2 years ago, and it is the law of the land. And we feel that it has been highly successful. Last year, it's on February 28th, it went into, it became law. And after the first year, after the studies came in, we found that 70,000 people nationwide were stopped as a result of background checks from purchasing guns. People who should not have been able to purchase them because they were fugitives or felons, adjudicated mentally ill, or children underage. 70,000 is a lot of people that shouldn't have guns that didn't get them legally over the counter. We recognize the fact that in the future, we have to take steps to ensure people can't get them from illegal underground markets as well. And in the future, that will be our thrust, programs to stop more interstate trafficking and to cut down on the availability of these weapons underground. We also have worked since '89 on the assault weapon ban, and felt fortunate too that last year we were able to get that signed into law. Unfortunately, as you well know, the 104th Congress was elected in the fall, and they don't bode well for future legislation. And in fact, both the leadership in the House and the Senate have vowed to repeal the assault weapon ban and try to dismantle the Brady bill. This was going to be coming up in the next week or so, but as a result of what happened in Oklahoma last week, the leadership has now announced they're going to postpone it for 3 months. We don't want a postponement. We don't want to wait until the nation forgets Oklahoma City, until it's not fresh in people's minds anymore for a vote. We want a postponement. What are our chances should it come up? We think they're fairly good. The House of Representatives will definitely be able to vote to repeal the ban. They have the votes. The Senate is very, very close, but we're going to be lobbying heavily for it. The president will then veto it. And the question would be, are there enough votes to override the veto? We believe that there are not going to be enough. And we will be working very hard until we are absolutely sure that this bill is safe, that we do have the votes. So anybody here who is with us, be sure, and if you're members, and up here in Massachusetts, I think everybody's fairly safe, or most of them are. If they were with us on the assault weapon ban, call them and thank them. If they weren't, call them and nag them and let them know, because 80% of the American people want to maintain the assault weapon ban. And we cannot let a small number of extremists run our policy and put special interest above public safety. We also work on the state level all around the country as well. We work, in fact, we were up here today endorsing Senate Bill 1226, which is a bill that's being sponsored by Representative Brett and Senator Jakes, which includes a state assault weapon ban. We've passed assault weapon bans in Connecticut, California, New Jersey, Hawaii, and I know somewhere else, but I can't think where the last one was. We've worked on child accident prevention laws and have passed those in 13 states. These are laws that make adults liable if their guns are left irresponsibly and children are able to get a hold of them and misuse them, because it is indeed the adults who are responsible. We passed a referendum in Maryland which banned Saturday night specials, the very small, easily concealable handguns. So we've been quite effective over the last 10 years in getting good legislation passed. But we don't think the answer is entirely in legislation, because this country is a little different than the rest of the world. We still need to change attitudes, and we need to educate our people. So we believe Handgun Control Incorporated is our lobby and works to pass better gun laws. We also have a sister organization called the Center to Prevent Handgun Violence. That's our educational and research arm. And their mission, and our mission on both sides really, is to reduce gun violence, death and injury, but theirs is to do it through education. And toward that end, we have a school curriculum, pre-kindergarten through 12th grade. It's called STAR. It's currently being used in LA, San Diego, New York, New Jersey, schools in Connecticut, New Jersey, Dade County, Cleveland, and Chicago. It teaches conflict resolution, other ways to solve problems, how to avoid peer pressure, what happens if you're caught in a situation where other kids bring guns to school. And as we all know, this country has changed so drastically in the last 4 or 5 years that the guns and the danger now is from children shooting children. And that's where we've seen the greatest rise in gun violence. And there's hardly a school in this nation that hasn't had an incident of children bringing guns to school. Many times they bring them out of fear. But this program is intended to teach them other ways to solve their problems. How, if they're afraid, do they deal with it? It's a very popular curriculum. It's called STAR, Straight Talk About Risks. And cities all over the country are trying to get it into their system right now. We also have a program with the American Academy of Pediatrics called STOP, Steps to Prevention, where the pediatricians around the nation are participating. They receive kits from us and the American Academy. Dr. Koop, by the way, is the one who helped us kick this off, where they receive posters and safety brochures. And the pediatrician, who is, as any mother knows, your most trusted person during those early years, the pediatrician can counsel parents about the dangers of a gun in the home, and that with a child, a gun is a ticking time bomb. And if you absolutely feel like you need or have to have a gun in the home, at the very least, keep it emptied out and locked up. It's the same thing the way they do with poison control or any other type of hazards in the home. We work with the entertainment industry because we feel that kids and all of us are being bombarded by violence on television. And we certainly don't believe in censorship, but we do believe that it's part of the responsibility of the media and the television industry to be responsible in their programming. And to that end, we do studio briefings. We've worked with almost all the major TV studios in bringing programs on the air that show the dangers of gun in the home, most especially programs for children, that don't glamorize the gun, don't make the gun look like some wonderful, sexy play toy, but instead show it in its reality and what it can really do. And we've had some real good success. We've had some good shows on this year. Picket Fences, Beverly Hills 90210, Blossom, Family Affairs, a lot of very good shows that have really shown these young children how dangerous a gun can be, and that guns are something that need to be handled responsibly. We also have a legal action program which defends the laws that we do pass. And every time we pass a law, our opponents, the gun lobby, go behind us and try and get those laws, they take them into the courts. And in most cases, we've been highly successful with the assault weapons ban. We've been able to go in as a friend of the court and file briefs, and we've been successful. with that. And we also, in the legal action program, also go in and defend victims where there might be liability on the part of the gun dealer or the manufacturer. And to explain to you kind of the type of case that we do take on, in Virginia, I think it was in Norfolk or Virginia Beach, a young kid, about 15, in fact he was 15, went into a local gun store to purchase an assault weapon. And he took his uncle, who was in his early 20s, with him. But it was the 15-year-old who tried out the gun, who held it, who tested it, and bought it. But it was the 20-year-old, 21-plus-year-old uncle who signed for it. But then the kid carried it out. The next day, that child went to school and shot and killed his English teacher. The dealer there very obviously knew the gun was for the child, not for the 28-year-old. And the dealer in that case was responsible, and we did take them to court and won. In most cases, gun dealers are careful about who they sell guns to and check. But in this case, they didn't. And in that case, a case was brought against it. We've also, we've got a case now on behalf of the victims of the massacre in San Francisco, where the law offices were attacked by the gentleman with an assault weapon. And we have a suit against that company, and it's currently moving forward, and we kind of had our first big victory last week, so we're very pleased with that. But we think in order to solve this horrible crisis that we're in, and we are in a crisis in this nation, we need to do both. We need to pass common sense laws, and we need to educate and keep educating. And no one segment of society is responsible for this, and no one segment of society can solve it all. We can't put all the blame on the television people. We can't put all the blame on the cops because they're not there to protect us. It's all of us who need to take responsibility. Gun owners need to take responsibility in the way they handle their guns and the way they keep them. We all need, as parents, to take responsibility in how we teach our children about life and how we as adults deal with it. Any parent who keeps guns in the home for self-protection, and the child knows it, when they go to school and feel in danger, the obvious message there is, well, Mom and Dad keep a gun for self-protection. If I need a gun, I should be able to have one as well. So parents need to rethink the messages they send to their kids. But we do need a balanced approach, and we need everybody working together. Because if we don't do something about gun violence, by the year 2003, according to the Center for Disease Control, deaths and injuries by firearms will exceed death and injuries by the automobile. And that is incredible. It's already true in the District of Columbia and 6 states. Why have we been able and successful to cut down automobile deaths and injuries? Because we treated it as a national epidemic. And we looked at it as a public safety and health issue. And we handled it in a variety of different ways. We license drivers. We make sure they know how to drive. We register the cars. We have speed limits. We have traffic lights. We have laws pertaining. We have seat belts. We've attacked it from a lot of different areas and from continual education. And as a result, and as cars have become safer through educating manufacturers and because of public demand for safer cars, what's happened? The death rate and injury rate has gone down. We can do the same thing with gun violence if we attack it from all these directions. It can be done. I definitely believe it can be done. but it is going to take us all working together. Currently, we got a tough row ahead in the next several years, I think, until this Congress begins to realize that public safety is on everybody's mind. And we're going to have to really work together to pass these laws. I hope each and every one of you will join us in our efforts to do so, and to teach these alternative forms of solving life's problems. You know, I think we're such a young country, and we're just beginning to learn how to live with each other. We're not doing a very good job of it. But I have kind of a historic story, since we're in such a historic church. I spoke last year, I guess it was, at Princeton to the Whig Cliosophic Society, which is the oldest debate club and largest in the world. And when I was reading the history of their organization, the Whigs, one of them were ultra-conservative and one were ultra-liberal, and they lived in the same dorm-like place, and they ate together, and they argued all the time over who was right politically. And usually they were able to always solve it at dinner, or after dinner, or through talking, because debating was their forum. But some particular issue came up, and they couldn't solve it, and the fighting just kept going on and on and on. So they decided they'd use the really acceptable way of solving problems, and that was, which was perfectly legal in those days, the dueling. And evidently there was a special dueling spot quite a ways away, and it was the middle of winter, and the two groups set off with their pistols to go into this duel. But they had to walk many, many miles, and it was a rough winter, and they got to the Delaware River, and it was frozen over, and they couldn't get the boats to go on over to the other side where they were supposed to duel, and they all kind of got fed up with this cold walk and the waiting, and they looked at each other and they said, "Let's go back home and try and solve it." And I said, when I spoke to them, I think you all really showed the first real example of a good cooling off period and conflict resolution, because good debate is generally, and a cooling off period are generally the best way we can ever solve our problems. I do want to make mention, before we go on to question and answers, a little bit about the situation that's happened in the last week, because obviously every time we turn on the television, we're all sickened and hurt and devastated by what happened in Oklahoma City. And the militias, the so-called militias that are forming around the nation. We have been watching and have known about them for a while. They became much more active after the assault weapon ban. The Brady bill began to really irritate them, but they really got very, very vocal and much more active when the assault weapon ban passed. I've seen it when I go and travel and speak. No matter where I speak, I know there are always dissenters in the audience, and normally they are members of, the gun lobby, the NRA, or a legitimate sport group who just don't happen to agree with me, and they're polite, and then we have good discussions, and we disagree. And that's gone on for years, and that's fine. But 3 weeks ago, I went to Oklahoma, just a little over a week before this happened, and spoke at the university. And before I went, it was advertised on internet that I was going to be there, because the NRA and the gun lobby they have a gun net. And also the G. Gordon Liddy show announced that I was going to be there, and would they send protesters. And this was a different type of protester. I'd run across them several times last year at the University of Miami University in Ohio. I'd run across them, Jim and I both had in Las Vegas at one time. Not your regular dissenters, but protesters of a different nature. The members of the militia, members of Passe Comitatus or some of the hate groups, and there's a definite difference, and it is a little scary. They had to use 43 law enforcement officers while I was there, and we had to have metal detectors. And one gentleman was arrested and still remains in jail on $10,000 bond for trying to come in to the speech with a loaded concealed weapon. We have seen this coming, the change, and we realized that it was because of the fact that they would no longer, that the perceived feeling that they'd no longer be able to get a hold of these assault weapons was of deep, deep concern to them. And it's of deep concern to them because, and I'm not talking about, and this is totally, these are the hardcore groups, it's because they absolutely don't want any government, and they feel that they need these weapons to rise up if government becomes too powerful or government does something that they don't want to have done. And in order to do that, they need weapons as or more powerful than the government does. And that's a scary thought, a real scary thought. It gives us even more of a reason to fight to keep these bans, because these particular weapons are dangerous enough in the wrong hands. They can be dangerous enough in the right hands, but they're certainly dangerous in the wrong hands. But I think any of us, in looking at these militias and seeing what has happened and the possibilities that can happen in the future, we know we can't have these on our streets and cannot be selling them ever again. There was a gentleman on television this weekend who wrote a book about the militias. He's an expert. I can't even remember the name of the book he wrote, but he was asked, how do you know, how have you been able to tell, and where can you tell where the militias are building up and where the growth is coming? And he said, it's very simple. We just look and trace where the assault weapons are being bought. And that's a pathetic view. And I'm sorry that we have to face this as a nation, but I guess it's going to have to be part of our growing up process. But as we do it, we are going to have to learn together, learn to live together, and to put extremes to the side and all try and work together, and to try and remember that public safety and the safety of our citizens is the singularly most important thing that we can ensure. And now, because I think we always get more accomplished during questions and answers, because I always leave out 9/10 of what I was going to say in the first place, I think maybe this might be a good time to move ahead.
Okay. Now, Ms. Brady will take your questions, and if you have a question or comment, if you'd please come to the microphone and stand in line, and we'll try to take the questions in order. Sir.
I'm a member of the John Birch Society, and your whole point of view on trying to deal with this problem just doesn't make sense to me in the slightest. I will agree it is a huge problem, and I will say that I am a proud gun owner, and I own 5 assault weapons, and most of my friends do, and we go shoot cans.
You shoot what?
Cans, you know, like Coke cans, Pepsi cans. You know, you've brought up a lot of facts, and they just don't make sense. Like you brought up Washington, D.C. I think is an excellent example of where your programs don't work. There's a total handgun ban, highest crime rate. Chicago, handgun ban, very high crime rate. If you go to those cities, they're like the third world because everyone is shooting at each other because you're telling them no. And the government said, no, you can't drink. The government made the mob. And if you want to cut guns back and ban handguns and ban these uses of guns, all you're going to do is create a huge black market, and you're doing it right now.
Sir,
it's
could we have a
being
question?
made.
Do you have a question?
Yes, the highlight question is, you bring up these points, but they don't meet with the facts, and the facts.
Well, maybe
Thank you very much.
I could clear up a few of those because you had a few inconsistencies there. First of all, Washington, D.C., yes, Washington, D.C. does have a high homicide rate. It's certainly not the highest in the nation by any means today. The highest crime is in Atlanta, Georgia. Washington, D.C. has fallen quite a bit, and a lot of it has to do with good policing in Washington because at one time it was the murder capital, and because it is the United States capital, it was highlighted. However, the guns that were being used in Washington were coming from Virginia. They were coming from other states into being trafficked into D.C. They were not sold in D.C., which was a very good reason why Virginia, and we pushed for it, passed a law called One Gun a Month. And for people who aren't particularly gun lovers, they'll say, why on earth would anyone need 12 guns a year? If you're on the other side, you probably feel offended that you can only buy one a month in Virginia. But the reason for it is gun traffickers, and the way the black market or the underground market is fed is through gun traffickers going into states like Virginia was at the time. Virginia was the #1 gun trafficking state in the nation because it had an instantaneous background check, no waiting period, and they knew they could go in and buy 100, 150 guns at one time and immediately resell them within minutes or hours on the streets of Washington, D.C., Philadelphia, New York, and Boston. That's where they were coming from. So Virginia passed a law that really has worked. Now to go in and traffic guns in Virginia, you have to find 100 people willing to buy one gun each and sell it to you. So they don't go to Virginia, the gun traffickers don't anymore. This black market or illegal market is not some mystical place. Every weapon that is sold on the underground market originated from a dealer at one time. And in order to stop and dry up that market, you have to first regulate over-the-counter sales, which the Brady bill does, to the wrong hands. And then you have to regulate interstate trafficking of guns and put in laws like the one gun a month in order to cut down on the underground market sale of weapons. In the district now, we've seen a huge decrease in the number of homicides with guns. There are so many misconceptions in this nation about what areas are violent, have gun violence, and what areas don't. Everyone thinks New York City. They'll say, well, look at New York City. It is so violent, and yet it's got the toughest gun laws in the country. New York City is not even in the top 20 of gun violence cities in the nation. And only out of all the gun deaths in New York City, 4% of them, the guns were bought in New York. 96% of them were bought in states that had poor and lousy laws. So you make this nationwide, and you're going to dry up and get rid of the underground market. And it's something we have to do, and we're going to have to do it in the future.
First, I'd like to comment on what you just said, and our governments prove that they can't stop a black market in anything. Not alcohol during Prohibition. They haven't been able to stop the drug trade. In fact, the drug trade is probably what's increased guns on our street and increased guns in our school, because we've had this war on drugs. Now kids are selling it because they can't be prosecuted, and now kids have the guns to protect their livelihood, all the money they're making on the drugs. So that's why
But the
we have
thing
this
is,
problem.
we can do it with weapons, and the law enforcement community and every criminal justice expert agrees it can be done with guns. With drugs, you have a lot. They're coming in from across borders. We are the manufacturers of the guns. We are the ones that, I mean, we're the problem here.
Can you cite one?
Drugs are very easily concealable. It's a totally different type of problem.
Can you cite one thing this country has ever been able to ban?
Thank you, sir.
I'm not for banning either.
Okay, could you address your question?
My question is, in Florida, the law enforcement was kind enough to allow citizens to get carry permits on a must-issue basis, have issued over 100,000 permits, well over, and the crime rate in Florida has dropped 21% at the same time as the crime rate in the United States has risen 15%. And there,
I have a very
because
good
of that,
answer for this one.
can you just, well, would you let me speak?
Yes.
Thank you.
I'd like your
If
question.
you'd finish your question, please.
Yes, my question is, since the crime hasn't risen and it's fallen because of gun ownership and citizens being able to carry, doesn't you opposing the gun ownership in the illegal citizens promote crime?
Thank you very much.
Okay, first of all, I must have said 20 times already tonight, I don't believe in banning all guns by any means. So I'm not trying to take away, if you're a responsible gun owner, your gun or your ability. Okay, so let's not talk about bans. Let's talk about regulations. And then you mentioned Florida. Florida did pass a concealed weapons bill. Shortly thereafter, it also passed a background check, and then on state referendum, a waiting period. Crime has gone down slightly in Florida. However, it is still the highest of any state in the nation, in the entire nation. And the University of Maryland just did a study of 9 cities in which, across the country, where this phenomena has happened, and I believe 4 of them were in Florida. And in those areas where the concealed weapons were allowed, the crime rate is actually increased by as high as 43%. We are not a nation that can allow every man, woman, and child to be armed in the street. If we are going to solve our problems that way, we might as well just give up. We are civilized. We do not want, I don't want, and I doubt many of you here want to know that when your kids go to the movies or when you go to a sporting event, a basketball game, football game, baseball game now that it's back, or driving down the highway or to church or anywhere else, that anybody around you could be packing a concealed weapon. Is that the way we want to live?
As long as they're law-abiding citizens, they aren't going to cause a problem, and that's been proved. Law enforcement are not afraid of
Excuse me, sir.
law-abiding
There's someone that's waiting just behind you. I appreciate your question very much.
I beg to differ with you.
Thank you, sir. Next question, please.
I support your position on assault weapons, but I'm perplexed by something, and I'd like your opinion. I recently returned from Israel. In Israel, everyone has an assault weapon, and they're not concealed. They're carried on the street. Men, women, youngsters, everyone has an assault weapon. And yet, except for the one episode in Hebron last year, we don't hear about Israelis slaughtering Israelis. What's the flaw, in your opinion, what's the flaw in the American makeup, in the American society, that prohibits us from carrying weapons?
Thank you.
In Israel, and I'm not as familiar with the Israeli law as I am with some of the others in Europe, but I do know that they are trained, highly trained, that these people are members of their own militia. They are the army. And in Israel, they are highly trained. Their background checks are They have to undergo background checks in order to have these. They are part of, and the same thing is true in Switzerland. They are part of the militia. They're not handed out willy-nilly to everybody. There is an extremely difficult, rigorous background check and training program in order to be able to have these. They live under different circumstances than we do. They are in an area in the Middle East where they are the militia fighting other countries. This is not the purpose. Our Army has assault weapons. I believe in assault weapons for our Army, for our defense, our federal and national defense, but I don't think people should be using assault weapons to fight other people. As a society, we're a very young country. We haven't learned to get along. And if we learn to solve this, if we try to continue to get along by fighting each other with weapons, we'll never grow up.
Good evening. Just having said that, I'm rather disappointed in you because you don't want to ban handguns, or at least have a much greater restriction of handguns. To me, I think the Brady bill is just too watered down, and I've even read in the paper that the Brady bill is not being enforced in quite a few states. And handguns kill somewhere in the order of, 19,000 people a year? How many murders take place in this country a year? I think the majority are committed by handguns.
You're right.
I am for a ban, complete ban on all handguns. Too bad for those people who like to use handguns for sport, but just too many people are being killed by these weapons, which are, as you know, certainly concealable, like the weapon that was used against your husband. So, for me, I just am disappointed in.
Sir, could we have a question? Is there?
Well, I think that.
I know, and that shows part of the debate, though. I mean, there are people who believe they should have assault weapons and anything they want, and others who really want to ban them all. I believe in much heavier regulation of the handgun than the Brady bill provided. That was our first step, because if you can't stop sales to the wrong persons over the counter, you can't do anything. I believe in doing it very much the way most other nations do. Very few nations ban handguns. They regulate them to the hilt. Our Brady bill for the future, or our comprehensive bill for the future, which we can't go ahead with now because of the nature of the 104th Congress, does call for licensing, permit to purchase, fingerprint background check, mandatory safety training. It calls for registration of all weapons. It calls for strong regulation on ammunition. Doing away with gun show sales to be sure that all secondary sales are tightly regulated. It calls for one gun a month, ban on Saturday night specials. It's much more comprehensive, but it would go to every extreme to be sure that those weapons were only in hands of law-abiding people, and that there was no way they could and would be able to be trafficked then to the wrong hands.
May we have the next question?
Good evening. First of all, I support the Brady bill because you have to start somewhere. And I believe that there's really no reason to use assault weapons to shoot cans for target practice or to shoot animals. It really burns me up to see assault weapons killing all of the animals. Lastly, although lots of people are killed with handguns around the country, especially in the minority communities, a lot of people are also killed with legally purchased handguns, assault weapons, and with stolen handguns and assault weapons. My son, who had just turned 31, personified all that was good. I live in Roxbury. He had just taken out his application to become a police officer he lived his whole life doing good things and helping kids and people. He was shot to death on May 1st of 1994 on his way home from work with what I assume was a handgun. One of the things I would like to see happen and I am working with people on that now, is to see all of the parents throughout the United States whose children were killed with handguns or assault weapons file a class action suit against the manufacturers. And I believe if that did happen, that we would see less handguns and less assault weapon homicides throughout the United States, particularly in our communities.
Well, you know, you heard me say we do have such a suit against the manufacturer of the assault weapon that killed the folks at 101 California in San Francisco.
Right, but it's not like parents of murdered children. I'm aware of that.
No. And for the first time, we're making movement on it. The courts have let us move ahead, and we're very pleased about that. And the encouraging thing about it, and the encouraging thing for such a suit as yours in the future, which I applaud you for, is the fact that what's different about this is that these guns, the assault weapon, the grounds on which we are suing is that it did exactly what it was intended to do, kill.
Good evening. When I hear you speak, I'm reminded of the old story about how do you tell if someone's lying, their lips are moving. You haven't said a truthful word tonight. For instance,
Please, if you'd ask
I
a
knew that
question-
freedom of speech is dead here as well, but let's ignore that issue.
Sir, you're welcome to ask a question. We want you to ask a question.
Thank you. A couple of quick comments. I am very a lot of other comments were made here tonight.
Please, if you'd like to make a comment and then a question, please.
Thank you. I'm offended at being called an extremist because I own a target rifle that the government requires for the type of target practice through the DCM that I do, that my son does. My son is in the National Guard. He joined to defend this country, and right now he has some questions about that because of the way things are going. But anyway, he's on the teams, but they won't let him bring the M16 home, so he needs an AR-15 to practice. And that is a requirement of his unit. It's a requirement of the United States government.
Sir, if you try to ask a question, we appreciate your comment.
I just want to know why, when you say the Brady Bill works, with 70,000 people stopped, why does the Justice Department say there were only 4 prosecutions that actually were felons trying to buy a gun, and why hasn't there been a single conviction?
Thank you very much.
Okay, now that is a good question, and I'll tell you the answer to that. There have been many more people arrested as a result of the background checks, because when the background checks under Brady were conducted, many people were found to be, now this, don't shake your head at me, young man, because I know the answer to this better. I know this law better than anybody in this nation, I can tell you that. Many people were stopped because they were convicted because there were felony warrants out for their arrest. These were state warrants, and a background check being done, and they found out that the person, there was a felony warrant out for murder, for rape, for burglary. Under those type arrests, there were hundreds done, many of whom were wanted for murder or rape. And there have been many convictions. What the statistic he's using, and I don't even know if 4 is correct, but it's not too many, is how many people were convicted by trying to buy a gun because they had been a convicted felon in the future. To understand this, you have to realize that you cannot purchase a gun if you're a convicted felon. Even if you've served your time, you've been in prison, it's been 10 years, and unless you have special dispensation of some type, you go in to buy a gun, and if you are a convicted felon, you may not buy a gun. Now, you may have been totally clean and paid your duty, and you go in to buy one. Under the Brady Law, you are guilty of committing another felony. That is a federal offense, not a state offense. It's a federal offense because the Brady Law is a federal law. At the time, if there are no federal officers on that location, the people are not going to be arrested and convicted. And like many crimes, federal crimes that occur, the state officials do not have the authority to arrest on that. So there are two different classes of people we're talking about. The Brady bill was responsible for the conviction of many, for the arrest and conviction of many felons who were their felony warrants out for. That's a big difference between somebody who 20 years ago committed a crime, served 10 years in prison, and hasn't done anything since. Those are two different situations, so don't get them mixed up. It's been extremely effective in stopping illegal purchases, and it has been effective in arresting people for whom there are warrants out on.
As I've listened to your comments this evening, I've been struck by the fact that, in my mind at least, this issue is breaking down into three parts. One being the manufacture and/or import, which is now illegal, of weapons. The second being the sale, which is regulated by the Brady bill. And I expect that as the court challenges are elevated through the court system, there will be some ruling as to constitutionality, et cetera, et cetera. And the third is personal possession. And to my mind, that is where the real crux of the public safety versus personal freedom issue comes in. It's not how many guns can I buy, but will there be any action toward regulating the actual possession of handguns. And I am not a gun owner, I don't want to be a gun owner, but as I look at the possibilities for excessive government action, it seems that that is the one possible fear, that somehow the encroaching government regulation will come down to what people possess in their homes. How can I go home this evening feeling comfortable that your program 20 years hence is not going to lead to that? Because I'd like to be able to leave here supporting
I hope,
you.
I mean,
Thank you.
And certainly the last thing on anybody's mind, or any of us in my organization, or I think anybody here in this room, is to think that we ever think the government should or ever go into anyone's home and for any reason. I mean, we have due process in this land, and we have laws, and I believe in our democracy. I believe very strongly that, and we've just seen it happen last November, that we have a good independent-minded group of individuals in this nation. And we have the best way on earth to maintain a government that is not going to encroach too far, and that is at the ballot box and through petition. And as long as we have that freedom, and we do, the government isn't going to come marching down your streets and taking away your guns and coming into your home. I mean, if it got, we have to have faith in this nation. I do. I think almost everybody else here does as well. The framers of our Constitution took pretty good pains to make sure that individual rights and individual freedoms were protected. Yes, there are some restrictions on all freedoms. We know that. But basically, our Constitution protects us pretty well.
I'd like to thank you, ladies and gentlemen, and please join me in thanking Sarah Brady for joining us tonight. Please be sure and join us for the last program in the Ford Hall Forum Spring Series. Former PLO spokesperson Hanan Ashwari will appear right here at the Old South Meeting House on May 18th. Thank you.